And welcome into today's roundtable. And earlier today, we had a chance to talk with John Gallagher about an FMCSA exemption request from the state of Florida, asking them to look at the way the CDL is administered, the test is administered, and if a person fails the first part, basically the pre-trip inspection, they can still continue to do the rest of it and then come back on another day and complete that first part of the test. Joining us to talk about this, if this is a good idea or not, Brandon Weisman, CEO of TruckSafe, as well as Thomas Watson, our enterprise trucking expert here as well. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Brandon, let me start off with you. Good idea, bad idea to try and do this, not in one complete day or one complete, I think the test takes about 2 hours or so. What do you think of this idea?
I don't have a problem with it fundamentally, because if you look what precisely the state of Florida is looking to do, it's really to just enhance the efficiency of this process. Because right now, the way that the rule is set up, it's set up so, as you said, Bill, if the student fails the pre-trip inspection part of the skills test, there's three parts to it: pre-trip, basic operation or basic controls, and then also the on-the-road portion. The way that the rule is set up now, if they fail the pre-trip portion, the student can't proceed to the other portions of that test on that particular day. But there's nothing that stops them from coming back the very next day and doing the thing over again. And so the problem that Florida's running into, as I understand it from their petition, they have done like 35,000 of these skills tests. They've administered that many just in the last 12 months. If you look at this, people are scheduling these skills tests, and they're scheduling like 1 hour blocks or 2 hour blocks or whatever it is. And if the student fails that first part, well, then you've got the examiner sitting there for potentially another hour and a half just twiddling his thumbs because the rule doesn't allow him to administer the other parts of that test and then have that driver come back and just do the pre-trip. No, the rule requires them to come back tomorrow. So it's not as if we are talking about a safety issue at this point, because the rule already allows those drivers to come back and try it again the next day. Really, all that Florida is asking for is, hey, from an efficiency standpoint, let us get as much done today as we can, recognizing that they're probably going to come back tomorrow and just finish that one part rather than having to come back tomorrow and finish all three parts. So like I said, fundamentally, I don't have a problem with it.
Thomas, what do you think? Good idea, bad idea to try and do this in terms of breaking it up, or if again, a student fails that first part, or should they have to do it all in one sitting?
I mean, I got to go with the good idea too. Now I'll give the opposite take that I'm hearing on social media from folks who are normally smaller fleets owner operators. But from a standpoint like CDL testing and trying to get the spots, I'd even heard that there's an issue with trying to get the time and the actual slot. So imagine you do fail your test and you got to wait maybe days or weeks to get a new spot. Highly inefficient. Like you still have to pass them all to get your CDL. So I guess at the end of the day, like even from a safety standpoint, yeah, correct. Now there had been some folks. Hot takes on social media, some people claiming that, well, if you can't, pass it all at once, or, it's going to lead to more unsafe drivers on the road. But if you really do dig into the language, like you said earlier, it looks like a pretty pragmatic approach to wasting time.
So, Brandon, looking at the test as an entity in and of itself, does it need to be changed at all, or just basically these three parts are good enough? Because we had Matt Leffler on not too long ago, and one of his concerns was that, of course, I mean, again, you can't test for all of this, you can't test for everything. But for instance, drivers are not tested in weather, they're not tested in mountainous terrain. Obviously, you can't do that if you don't live in those areas or are exposed to those types of things. Yet, long-haul truckers will be at that time. Any way that you see this test might be changed over time if it necessarily needs to?
Well, one of the big things that I see with this, like I said, I'm not concerned with Florida's request specifically for the reasons I've already mentioned, but I do have some concerns, and I'm sympathetic to people who have safety concerns with a broader question that's not up for debate in the narrow issue that we're dealing with Florida's petition, but I think should be up for debate, which is, are we comfortable with the basic premise that a driver can fail a portion of the skills test and and essentially come back and just try it again without any intervention in the interim period of time. I mean, so this rule has been in effect since around 2011. I think this process where this idea that they can fail a portion of the test, and whatever portions they do pass, they get to bank for future use. So if I pass, let's say I pass pre-trip and I pass the basic controls, but I fail the on the road portion, I get to bank those first two sections that I passed. And then when I come back the next time, all I have to do is pass that last portion and I'm good to go. But I think we should be asking the question is that really what we want to happen? Because if you look at what these skills tests are, it's not like we're testing, hey, is this a good driver who we really feel comfortable out on the road operating? No, we are testing for basic competence, the very baseline minimum that we feel comfortable allowing them to operate. So if you can't even pass the baseline minimums that we have set up, I have real heartburn with saying, just come back tomorrow and try again. I mean, clearly the person needs some additional instruction and probably some additional time spent with them to make sure that we understand the root of why they failed the test. And I think we can do that now. I think it's time to look at that again now that we have the entry-level driver training requirement in place, because it seems to me that would be the good mechanism to do that. Because if we're uncomfortable with them just being able to come back and take it again the next day, because maybe they get a more lenient examiner the next day, and that's the only reason they pass. Yeah. Maybe that's the only reason they pass the next day. It's not that they have improved; they just got a more lenient examiner. So maybe the way that we should think about this, and that the FMCSA should consider this, is, hey, if I don't pass a particular portion of the skills test, there's a waiting period now, and I have to go back and work again with an instructor and make sure that they are truly comfortable with my ability to do these things. I would feel more comfortable with that, but again, that's not up for debate with Florida's application. That's not what we're dealing with.
Right. So. Well, we can still jump into that arena as well. Thomas, what do you think in terms of the overall test? Any changes you'd make?
I can't remember if it's involving putting on chains or not, but whenever I managed fleets, drivers would not be very good at putting on chains, even if they knew how to put chains on. Backing accidents were a big concern. There's a reason large nationwide carriers put those newly minted CDL holders who just passed these tests, they'll put them on with a trainer for like 6 weeks for finishing. And then they'll have their own tests at the terminals frequently to double check. So yeah, I do think that it does need an overhaul in terms of the quality. There's been some talk about, not all CDL schools, some are CDL puppy mills that they've called them, or CDL mills cranking it out with lax standards. And unfortunately, those costs typically fall onto the larger fleets. Your smaller carriers are going to say, well, you need 2-3 years experience or say clean record. But it does impact the roadways and those large mega carriers, depending upon what you want to call them, because they're the ones oftentimes fronting the extra costs and risks when these folks are coming out not properly trained as they should.
We've got a couple of minutes left here. Brandon, when looking at it from a passenger vehicle standpoint, obviously you've got the learner's permit, the restricted license, the regular license in most places where you're going to have a year and a half or so, maybe even 2 years in cases to get all that done. Do you look at that perhaps as an added layer of safety, possibly in terms of, like we say, going on with the trainer driver to make sure that you're doing the right thing when you get caught in situations where you need change, where you're driving through mountains, where you're headed through weather, that kind of stuff?
I think it's definitely something to consider. We have something similar like that now with the CDLs, with the commercial learner's permit and the requirement that they be accompanied by a CDL holder while they have the commercial learner's permit before they're able to then go through the entry-level driver training and pass the entry-level driver training. And then if they do that, then they are eligible to get to the DMV and take the skills test. So I think we are making progress in that regard, particularly with the entry-level driver training. I mean, there's a lot of things to dislike about the entry-level driver training, but if nothing else, at least it kind of standardizes the materials that we are expecting all of these potential CDL applicants to know. And so I think that has gone a long way to help improve the process, because before that, I mean, there was just nothing like that. I mean, you could learn from your brother how to drive the truck, and as long as you could pass the knowledge and skills test, then you're good to go. At least now we have somewhat of a curriculum, but to your point, the question is, do we need to go a little bit further with it and maybe require some more on the road training with a trainer and stuff like that? I think it's certainly an interesting question, one that I wouldn't be opposed to revisiting.
Thomas, really quickly, looking at it in terms of more things to do to get the CDL versus larger barrier to entry, which of course the trucking industry doesn't want to see either.
Well, I mean, you're going to see large fleets for the sake of safety want higher barriers to entry because they're going to be the ones who partner up with the CDL schools, and they'll be the ones who help pay for you to get your CDL. So anything that makes it safer, they may be halfway self-insured. Ask Matt Leffler. It's hard to get insurance. You can't just call Allstate for my billion-dollar trucking company. So, I would see that we should see large fleets continue to push for overhauls and even more standards and make it more difficult because they're the ones who are taking the vast majority of these newly minted CDL holders. So, I think that is one of those things where when you have safety, it's a very persuasive thing, and safety often will trump it. When you have 80,000 GWR rolling on the road, you can take out a few cars. I'm going to lean towards the safer side, a little stricter if I have to be.
Of course, if the FMCSA says or gets the idea that there's more safety out there than there is now, then they probably would go with the more safe option there as well. Brandon and Thomas, thanks so much for joining us for our roundtable.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, we will take a short break. We'll come back, wrap up this edition of FreightWaves Now, coming up after this.